To the single parent hearing my voice, I want you to listen closely before this story unfolds. Remember this: you are not failing. You are in a fight. You are strong. You are not by yourself, and your child is incredibly fortunate to have you. And to everyone else listening, your compassion, your attention, and your silent fortitude are all vital here. You are a part of this narrative as well. Subscribe for more stories. The chime of the doorbell sliced through the storm's fury like a blade cutting through stillness. Jamal Brown sat frozen at his kitchen table, his shaking hand clutching an electricity bill emblazoned with a final notice in angry red lettering. The microwave clock showed it was 9:47 p.m. He couldn't imagine who would be at his door so late, particularly in this kind of weather. A clap of thunder exploded overhead, so powerful it felt as though it might shatter the foundation of his humble duplex. Jamal's heart pounded against his ribs as he moved warily toward the front door. Peeking through the peephole, he could just make out two figures huddled together against the deluge. They were young women, their dark, braided hair soaked and plastered to their heads, their shoulders hunched against the punishing rain. In his neighborhood, unexpected visitors after dark were rarely a good sign, a lesson Jamal had learned the hard way over the last 3 years. Yet, something in their posture, the way they clung to one another, seemed more lost than menacing. It awakened a paternal instinct deep within him, a feeling that reminded him of his own children. He opened the door a few inches, leaving the security chain in place. "Can I help you?" he asked. The taller of the two looked up, and Jamal felt his breath catch in his throat. Her dark eyes were filled with a raw desperation that was almost painful to witness. "Please, sir, we're so sorry to disturb you," she began. "Our car broke down about a mile away, and we've been walking through this downpour. We've tried every house on this block, but nobody has answered," she pleaded. "We just need to use your phone to call for help." Jamal studied their faces in the weak light of his porch lamp. They couldn't have been much older than 20, with identical features that clearly marked them as twins. It was their eyes that reached him, wide, terrified, and pleading. They reminded him so much of his 6-year-old Amara when she would wake from a bad dream, needing her daddy to make her feel safe again. "We tried calling for a tow," the second twin added, her voice trembling so badly that her words were barely audible. "But the storm must have taken out the cell service. We don't have any cash for a cab or a motel room. We've been walking for hours. Please, we just need some help." Jamal's practical side screamed warnings at him. He didn't know these young women. They could be setting him up for some kind of scam. In his former life, when he lived in a gated suburban community, he would have likely called the authorities to handle it. But as he looked at them now, truly saw them, he recognized something that silenced every logical doubt. He saw his own children. He saw Malik, now 8, living thousands of miles away. He saw Amara, whose bedtime stories he now had to tell over a crackly phone line twice a week, if he was lucky. What if it were them stranded somewhere, frightened and alone? What if they needed a stranger's help and every door was closed to them? "Hang on," Jamal said, his voice more gruff than he'd intended. He shut the door long enough to slide the chain free. When he opened it again, the full force of the storm blasted him, the rain driving sideways across the porch and soaking him in an instant. "Come in," he urged. "Get out of this weather." The relief that flooded their faces was so complete, so overwhelming, that Jamal felt a sting in his own eyes. "Thank you," they breathed in unison as they stepped inside his modest living room. "Thank you so much. We were starting to think we'd have to sleep in the car." Jamal retrieved 2 towels from the bathroom, trying not to feel self-conscious about their frayed edges. Everything in his home bore the marks of a man just getting by. The wallpaper was peeling in corners, the heater groaned like an old man on a staircase, and the furniture was a collection of second-hand pieces from yard sales. "Here, dry yourselves off," he offered, handing them the towels. I'm Jamal, by the way. I'm Amina, said the taller twin, taking the towel as if it were a precious gift. And this is my sister, Samira. We can't tell you how grateful we are. We really thought we were going to freeze out there. Where's your car now? Jamal asked, shutting the door against the howling wind that seemed bent on pulling his house apart. About a mile north of here, Samira answered, towel drying her braids. It started making this horrible grinding sound and then just died. We're not from this area. She hesitated, shooting a quick, unreadable glance at her sister. We were just looking at some property for a friend. Jamal noted the brief exchange but didn't push it. The neighborhood they mentioned wasn't exactly a place where people shopped for real estate, especially not young women who looked as though they belonged on a magazine cover. But he knew everyone had their own story, and he valued privacy. That's not a great area to be stuck in at night, he said gently. You made the right choice to leave the car and find help. As the twins dried off, Jamal couldn't help but notice details that didn't fit their story. Their clothing, though drenched, was obviously expensive. They wore designer dresses that likely cost more than his monthly utility bill and wore handcrafted leather boots. What were girls like this doing in his part of town at nearly 10 o'clock at night? The phone is in the kitchen if you want to try making a call, he offered, setting his curiosity aside. Whatever their background, their distress was clearly real. Amina tried the landline, her frustration growing with each attempt. The storm must have knocked out the phone lines too, she said, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Jamal felt that familiar pull in his chest, the same protective urge that had once pushed him to work 18-hour days to build a future for his family, the very instinct that had ultimately cost him everything he cherished. But tonight, that instinct had a simple message. Help them. Look, he said, the words spilling out before he could reconsider. You can't go anywhere in this weather. The forecast says this storm is going to rage all night. You're welcome to stay here until morning. The twins looked at each other, their faces showing the silent debate between trusting a stranger and braving the storm. Neither was an ideal option for two young women on their own. We wouldn't want to impose, Samira said cautiously, her voice carrying a refined accent that hinted at an upbringing of privilege. You've already done so much. You're not imposing, Jamal assured them with a self-deprecating smile. I've got a couch that pulls out into a bed. It's not a 5-star hotel, but it's warm and dry. He paused, suddenly aware of his humble living conditions. Though I should warn you, the breakfast menu is pretty sparse. I think I have some cereal and maybe a little bread for toast. For the first time since their arrival, both young women broke into genuine smiles that completely transformed their expressions. That sounds absolutely wonderful, Amina said, and her tone made it clear she was being more than just polite. As Jamal set them up for the night, pulling sheets and blankets from his closet, he found himself opening up to them. The twins were intelligent and engaging, and their warmth began to fill the quiet spaces of his home. They inquired about his work, his life, and his neighborhood. Normally, Jamal shied away from personal questions. The pain was still too close to the surface. But their sincere interest prompted him to share things he hadn't spoken of in years. I'm an architect, he heard himself say as he prepared them hot tea with the last of his good tea bags, the mug warming his chilled hands. Well, I used to be. Now I mostly do freelance drafting work whenever I can get it. That sounds fascinating, Samira said, curled up on his worn sofa with her hands wrapped around the steaming mug. What sort of things did you design? Jamal's throat tightened as the memories rushed back. Commercial projects mostly, office buildings, retail centers. I had my own firm for a while. He didn't elaborate on how that firm had taken over his life, how his relentless pursuit of success had made him blind to what truly mattered. What happened to it? Amina asked softly, then immediately looked regretful. I'm sorry, that's probably too personal. You don't have to answer that. It's all right, Jamal said, surprised at his own readiness to confide in them. The storm outside seemed to create a safe, intimate space where confessions felt possible. My life sort of imploded about 3 years ago. Divorce, the business partnership fell apart. I had to sell everything just to cover the legal fees. He thought he would stop there, but their expressions, full of a compassion that seemed beyond their years, urged him on. I have 2 kids, he said quietly, the words feeling like they were scraping his throat. Malik is 8 now, and Amara is 6. They live with their mother, Renee, clear across the country. The twins' expressions softened with an impossible gentleness. That must be incredibly difficult, Samira said softly, being so far away from them. Jamal's vision blurred as a wave of emotion, as powerful as the storm outside, washed over him. Yeah, it is. I call them twice a week, but it's not the same as being there. I miss everything. Soccer games, school events, bedtime stories. Last week, Amara lost her first tooth, and I had to hear about it 3 days later during a 5-minute phone call. His voice broke on the final words and he turned away, embarrassed to be so vulnerable in front of these strangers. What happened? Amina asked with infinite kindness. With Renee, I mean. Jamal took a shaky breath. Renee said I was never present. That I was more invested in building a business than in building memories with our family. She wasn't wrong. I thought I was providing for them, securing their future, but I was completely missing their present. By the time I realized what I was losing, it was too late. The sorrow in his voice seemed to hang in the small room, blending with the sound of rain drumming against the window panes. She moved away for a fresh start, Jamal continued, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Said she needed to escape all the memories. The court gave her primary custody. I see Malik and Amara during summer breaks and on some holidays, when I can afford the flight. How often is that? Samira asked, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. This might be the first summer I miss, Jamal admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Work has been slow, and the custody lawyer took most of my savings. I've been trying to save up, but... He gestured helplessly toward the stack of bills on his kitchen table. The twins listened with an empathy that felt profound for their age. They asked thoughtful questions and shared stories of their own childhood. And slowly, Jamal felt the crushing weight of loneliness that had become his constant shadow begin to lift. You know what stands out to me about your story? Amina said after a long, comfortable silence. You're still fighting for them, even after everything fell apart. When it would have been so much easier to give up, you're still trying to be their father. They're my whole world, Jamal said simply. Even if I can't be with them every day, I need them to know their dad never stopped loving them, never stopped trying. As the evening went on, Jamal learned that Amina and Samira were 22-year-old recent college graduates. They spoke warmly of their upbringing, but were vague about their family, only mentioning that their father was a businessman and deflecting when Jamal asked for more details. He sensed there was more to their story, but respected their privacy. He was, after all, a stranger who had offered them shelter for a night. They didn't owe him their life story. You know, Amina said as Jamal prepared the pull-out couch with his best sheets, we've stayed in some very luxurious hotels in our lives, but I don't think I've ever felt as welcome as I do right here. That's very kind of you, Jamal replied, tucking the sheets around the thin mattress. But I'm sure you're just being polite about my humble setup. No, really, Samira insisted, her voice so sincere it made Jamal look up. It's not about the place. It's about the person. You opened your home to complete strangers during a storm. You shared what little you had, your food, your home, your story. Not many people would do that. "I have kids," he said simply, the truth of it settling in his chest like a warm coal. If Malik and Amara were ever stranded somewhere, scared and alone, I'd hope someone would help them. I'd pray someone would look past their own fears and just show them some kindness. As they settled in for the night, the twins whispering softly on the pull-out couch, Jamal lay in his own bed listening as the storm outside gradually subsided. For the first time in months, his small duplex didn't feel so empty. The quiet murmur of their voices, the knowledge that he had been able to help someone, the simple act of human connection, it all brought back memories of a time when his house was filled with the sounds of family and laughter. He drifted off to sleep, thinking about kindness, about the strange turns of fate that had brought these two young women to his door, and how sometimes the smallest gestures of compassion can feel like the most significant things in the world. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Jamal woke early, a habit formed from years of trying to find more hours in the day. He found the twins already awake, sitting at his kitchen table in a hushed, urgent conversation that ceased the moment they saw him. "Good morning," he said, offering them coffee in his mismatched mugs. "How did you sleep?" "Better than we have in weeks," Amina replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. Her tone suggested she was talking about more than just physical rest. After a simple breakfast of toast and the last of his juice, Jamal offered to drive them to their car. The twins accepted, though he noticed they seemed oddly hesitant to leave, sharing meaningful looks he couldn't decipher. During the short drive, they were much quieter than the night before. Jamal caught them looking at him in a way that made him feel self-conscious, as if they were memorizing his features. Their car, a sleek, high-end sedan, sat where they'd left it, looking even more out of place in the neighborhood by daylight. Jamal popped the hood to take a look. "Your alternator belt snapped," he diagnosed, pointing to the issue. "It's an easy fix, but you'll need a tow to a garage. Shouldn't cost too much." The twins called their roadside assistance, and within an hour, a tow truck arrived. As they were about to leave, Amina pressed a business card into Jamal's hand. "If you ever need anything," she said, her eyes unusually bright with emotion, "anything at all, please call this number." Jamal glanced at the card, his mind too occupied with the strange sadness of their departure to really register the elegant, embossed lettering. "Thank you," he said, tucking the card into his pocket. "Take care of yourselves." As the tow truck rounded the corner, taking Amina and Samira with it, Jamal felt the familiar weight of loneliness settle back onto his shoulders. The brief respite of companionship was over. He was back to his reality of unpaid bills, empty rooms, and the gnawing worry of whether he'd see his children this summer. But something had shifted. A small spark of hope had been reignited in those few hours of connection. For the first time in months, Jamal felt that maybe, just maybe, he could keep going. Over the next 2 weeks, Jamal poured himself into his work with a new sense of purpose. He managed to land a small project, designing renovations for a local business, which would help him catch up on bills and maybe, if he was frugal, save enough for a plane ticket. He thought of Amina and Samira from time to time, but the pressures of daily life soon pushed them to the back of his mind. The business card they'd given him sat forgotten in his jeans pocket until he found it after a wash cycle and placed it on his dresser. Then, on a Tuesday morning that began like any other, his entire world changed. Jamal was bent over his drafting table when his doorbell rang. It was 10:30 a.m. Probably a package, he thought. He opened the door and froze. Standing on his porch was a distinguished man in an exquisitely tailored suit, flanked by Amina and Samira Okoro. It wasn't just their presence that made Jamal's knees feel weak. It was the way they stood together, the undeniable family resemblance, and the aura of immense wealth and power that surrounded the older man. "Mr. Brown," the man said, extending a hand with a warm smile. "My name is Chief Adewale Okoro. I believe you've already met my daughters." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with breathtaking clarity. The expensive clothes on two young women stranded in his neighborhood, their vague answers about their family, the business card he'd barely looked at. Okoro. "You're their father," Jamal managed, his voice a faint whisper. "I am," Chief Okoro said, his handshake firm and reassuring. "And I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude that I can never truly repay." Amina stepped forward, her eyes already welling with tears. "We told him everything, Jamal. How you were the only person who helped us that night. How you opened your home to strangers. How kind you were, even when you had so little to give." "Dad wanted to come sooner," Samira added, "but we asked him to wait. We needed to be sure about something first." Jamal's head was spinning. "Sure about what?" Chief Okoro's smile widened, revealing the source of his daughter's warmth. "My daughters are excellent judges of character, Mr. Brown. They insisted on doing some research before we approached you." "Research?" Jamal asked, a mix of confusion and alarm rising in his chest. "About your children," Amina said gently. "About your custody situation, your financial troubles, your career history, everything you told us that night." A hot flush of shame washed over Jamal, his private struggles, his failures, his desperation. It had all been investigated and discussed. The humiliation felt immense. "Please don't be angry," Samira said quickly, noticing his expression. "We weren't trying to invade your privacy. We just wanted to help you the way you helped us." "Help?" Jamal's voice cracked. "I don't understand what's happening." Chief Okoro stepped closer, his expression kind but serious. "Mr. Brown, I am the CEO of Okoro Development Group. We specialize in major construction projects across the country. I've reviewed your architectural portfolio, what we could find of it, and I am genuinely impressed with your work." Jamal gripped the doorframe for support. "I still don't understand." "What I am about to offer you," the chief said carefully, "is not charity. It is good business, combined with a recognition of exceptional character. My company is expanding, and we need talented architects who understand that buildings are more than just structures. They are dreams made tangible." He paused. "I am offering you a position as senior project architect with Okoro Development Group. The salary would be more than sufficient to allow you to relocate closer to your children and pursue joint custody. You would be designing the kind of meaningful projects you once dreamed about, projects that build communities." The world seemed to slow as Jamal absorbed the words. That's impossible. You can't just offer someone a job because your daughters stayed at their house for one night." "You're right," Chief Okoro said with a warm laugh. "That's not how I do business. But I can offer a job to a man whose character has been tested and proven. Do you know what my daughters told me about that night? They told me about a man who had every reason to be bitter, who was struggling to survive, yet still opened his door to strangers in a storm. They told me about someone who shared his food, his shelter, and his story, asking for nothing in return." Amina's voice was steady as she spoke. "Dad builds more than just buildings, Jamal. He builds teams and futures. He has spent his life looking for people who understand that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others." "We weren't stranded by accident that night," Samira admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Well, the car really did break down, but we were in your neighborhood because Dad is considering developing some properties in this area. We were getting a feel for the community." Her father nodded. "When their car died, it became an unintentional test of the neighborhood's character." 17 houses, Mr. Brown. They knocked on 17 doors before they came to yours. 17 families looked through their peepholes and chose not to get involved. Tears streamed down Jamal's face as he realized how close he had come to being number 18, how easily he could have ignored the bell. But there's more, Chief Okoro continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Okoro Development sponsors a comprehensive scholarship fund for the children of our employees. Amara and Malik would qualify for full college scholarships, plus any support they need to succeed. The folder slipped from Jamal's numb fingers. He sank onto his front step as sobs racked his body, releasing 3 years of pent-up pain and desperate hope. "Why?" he whispered through his tears. "Why would you do this for me?" Amina knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Because when it mattered most, you weren't a stranger to us. You were a protector. And because Dad taught us that success is meaningless unless you use it to change lives," Samira added, her own eyes moist. "That night, listening to you talk about your children, we knew we had found someone special." Chief Okoro's voice was thick with emotion. "My daughters could have called me that night, but they didn't. Sometimes, life puts us exactly where we need to be. That storm was an opportunity for them to learn about true kindness, and for me to find the kind of person I want building my company's future." As Jamal sat there, he thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, successful, driven, and losing his family. That man would have seen the twins as a networking opportunity, but the man he had become, broken, humbled, and stripped of everything but his core values, had simply seen 2 young women in need. By choosing compassion over caution, he had opened a door to a future he couldn't have imagined. "There is one condition," Chief Okoro said with a grin, helping Jamal to his feet. "Thanksgiving dinner is at our house this year. My daughters insist." Jamal laughed through his tears, a sound that was rusty but genuine. "I accept. All of it." He looked at each of them. "I can't believe this is real." "It's real," Amina assured him. "And Jamal, there's something else. Dad has already spoken with the best family law attorney in your children's state. If you want to pursue joint custody, you'll have all the support you need." For the first time in 3 long years, Jamal allowed himself to truly imagine the future, being there for soccer games and school plays, tucking Amara and Malik in at night, building not just buildings, but memories. He had learned a powerful lesson about the ripple effects of human kindness, about how opening your door to others truly opens your heart to blessings. "You know the most amazing part of all this?" Jamal said, wiping his eyes. "I almost didn't answer the door that night. I was so tired, so broke. I came this close to just ignoring the doorbell." "But you didn't," Samira said softly. "When it mattered, you chose to care." "And that choice," Chief Okoro added, "changed everything. Not just for you, but for all of us. You're about to get your life back." As Jamal stood in the morning sunlight, surrounded by the family that had chosen him because of who he was in his darkest hour, he understood something profound. Kindness wasn't just about helping others. It was about staying open to grace, to the unexpected ways compassion can circle back and transform your world. The storm had indeed washed away his old life, making space for something new and beautiful to grow. 6 months later, Jamal Brown stood in his new office in his new city, looking out at the skyline. He was designing a community center that would serve families like his had once been, families struggling to hold on to hope. In the distance, he could see the elementary school where Amara and Malik, who now lived with him half the time, would start in the fall. His phone buzzed with a text from Amina. "Dad has a new project. Guess who's the lead architect? Also, Sunday dinner? Mom's making jollof rice." Jamal smiled, typing his reply. "Wouldn't miss it. Family dinner is sacred." And it was true. Because sometimes when you open your door to strangers in a storm, You don't just offer them shelter. You invite miracles into your own life. The storm that brought Amina and Samira Okoro to Jamal's door had lasted only a few hours, but the kindness he showed them would last forever, rippling out and changing lives in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. In the end, we are all just strangers in the storm, hoping someone will hear our knock and choose to open the door.